Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So today, as per usual, we're going to go over my top 10 thoughts from the last week of football that we watched. Plus, I've got my full predictions from last week to show you at the back. Just if you're a hater, you're going to love them, I promise. It was not a good week for me, but you can see the full breakdown of all that, plus every single one of those top 10 thoughts that I had from this upcoming week. You can see it through the rest of the video. Before we get to it, I want to make sure you hit subscribe. It doesn't help you, or it doesn't do anything for you, but it helps me out a ton. I'm just trying to grow the channel. It's literally free. You know the whole drill at this point. But the first game I want to look at, it wasn't the most exciting game by any means. It wasn't, a particularly close game even that ended up being one of my wrong predictions. But Ohio State beating Iowa the way they did, I found it super interesting for realistically one reason only. The fact that they left C.J. Stroud in the fourth quarter really almost was alarming to me, because when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, what are you gaining from leaving him in? You're up by quite a bit going into the fourth quarter. Iowa's defense has been garbage. You have not seen a lick of any promise from that offense this year. It's been quite a bad state of affairs for that team. So what's the purpose of leaving C.J. Stroud out on the field? I mean, you were up 40-10 entering the fourth. C.J. Stroud threw all but 2 passes for the Buckeyes. The game went down, even with those touchdowns, as his second worst of the year. He ended up with 4 touchdowns, I believe, and 1 pick. It ended up as his second worst game of the year. He was definitely worse versus Rutgers. Now, like I mentioned, I didn't fully understand it. Then I kind of started thinking about it. And whose call was it? Is my question. Did Stroud ask to not be taken out of the game? Did Ryan Day ask for him to remain in? Did the offensive coordinator? I don't know, but whoever's decision it was, I have a sneaking suspicion that they really, really, really want C.J. Stroud to win the Heisman. It seems like they wanted him to remain out there to boost his numbers, and by extension of that, be in the driver's seat for it. But listen to this. Even if he wouldn't have thrown a single touchdown in that game as a whole, not even talking about the fourth quarter, he would have still been tied with Drake May at 28 total. He would have also still had a game advantage over a lot of his closest competitors. He has currently played 7. A lot of teams have already played 8 to this point, like Tennessee, which is probably the most notable one right now, because obviously it's Hendon Hooker. In a game that was pretty comfortably over, it felt like a weird attempt, again, for whoever made that call to boost his numbers for individual awards. And that kind of makes me think, not necessarily, what is this team doing wrong, or how is this team structured, but when you really boil it down, it doesn't seem like they have the right mindset. If that's what they were doing, you shouldn't really be focusing on individual awards. You shouldn't be leaving your quarterback out there in these types of games whenever it is over, just to potentially get hurt, or maybe to potentially embarrass your opponent, even though Iowa's not a real rival with Ohio State. None of it really felt right to me. None of it really felt cohesive at the end of the day, and quite frankly, I just wanted to make sure to bring it up and talk about the fact that it made very, very little sense to me. So the next one I want to talk about, another team that has not made much sense at all to me this season. The Miami Hurricanes have been bad. Well, bad is the easiest way to say that, but I want to kind of put their season in fighting terms, if you will, and talk about what they need to do moving forward to protect what they've got and that little bit of respect that they do still have throughout this year. So, again, let's put it in fight terms. Think of Miami as an MMA fighter or a boxer, or really whichever one you prefer here. They're in the second round of a 3-round fight, and it's a dogfight. It's a close one. But, they've got hit on the chin a couple really good times. They've really got stung. They've felt what that pressure feels like, and they could very well go down. They could crumble right here, and that could be the end of the year, and, feasibly, have some real long-lasting damage. Now, do you go out there and continue to swing when you know that you're on the fence and you know your opponent right now being, the at-large portion of the ACC and the at-large portion of other Florida teams and whoever you're going to have to go up against in that recruiting base, you look across and you know that they're doing better than you right now. So, do you keep swinging? I wouldn't. I would try to grab onto your opponents. And in football terms, that would be play a very methodical style of football, have as much time of possession as you can, and try to minimize what damage has already been done to your season. Quite frankly, you're not coming back from this, at least within the first year. But if you really let the reins slip and you really find yourself with your back up against the wall and real issues and real problems are arising and you're seeing players transfer out and you're not seeing that same recruiting base that you thought you were going to get with Mario Cristobal, things are going to get ugly. That's the simplest way I can put it. Falling apart, looking subpar, it could result in damages that not only last you for this year, that not only last you for the following year, even with, portal and recruitment and whatnot, but it could last you as long as the Cristobal era runs if you're not careful, because really all it takes is one bad start to a season before things get really, really ugly. I don't want this podcast, though, to be all doom and gloom. I've started it off as Ohio State having the wrong mindset. And I talked about Miami really needing to buckle up and just keep control of everything they've got right now. But I do want to even keep it in the ACC. It's not all doom and gloom out there, because Clemson and Syracuse, while Syracuse did not get the win that they hoped for and did not get to keep this undefeated season alive, I don't think that game was a bubble-bursting moment for the Orange. Clemson absolutely won the game. That part is not disputable. You look at the final score, you see Clemson earned the win there, but the Orange traveled very well, and to travel like they did, fighting through the adversity that they did, with the atmosphere that they were in, earned a ton of respect from me. They fought tooth and nail to hang into that game. There was very few teams that could have kept it as close as they did, even when the going got tough. When Clemson finally mounted that huge comeback and got on top of things and rotated Klubnik in instead of DJ, a lot of teams would have folded there, because once the momentum slips out of your hands, it's very hard to get it back. And Syracuse didn't really do that. They remained poised. They kept trying to do whatever they could to stay in the game. Ultimately did not work out. They did lose, but you've got to look all around that field and realize how great of a performance that truly was, especially for a team that does not have the same talent that Clemson does. For example, Dino Babers, head coach, he's been doing great. Garrett Schrader, the quarterback, Sean Tucker, Jahad Carter, all of them, and really the entirety of the team, deserves a lot of praise for what they did, because quite frankly, I didn't think it was possible. I will admit it does suck a little bit that I was hesitant to give Syracuse the praise that they deserve, because it took a loss against a very high-level team for me to realize that it was not facetious. It was not something that you could easily poke holes into. Syracuse is a good team. Dino Babers has found a way to rally the troops and to really find how those guys operate best. While that has been a very impressive thing for them, they did lose. But there's another team that I've been very skeptical about lobbing praise onto, but they just keep on winning. I can't keep running from it. It's time to really give TCU some love, because what they have done to this point is phenomenal. Man, I don't know what Sonny Dykes is doing in TCU. I don't know if it's just how he approaches football, or how he operates practices, or his schemes, or what it is, but whatever it is, he has done something incredible. To go into TCU and immediately take them out of what was an ugly time under Gary Patterson before he left. And now, that's not to discredit what he did at the university throughout all of his years, but, for that last little bit of it, it was not good. It was not pretty. It was not something you enjoyed seeing. He immediately jumped in the driver's seat of that car and has them driving to the farthest distance that they have been in a while. He has them deep within the AP polls at a very high number, very were, within a pretty large part of the season already being done. It's incredible to see that happening. And let's play hypothetical for a second. I like the concept of thinking about how high this plane can fly, if you will. Let's say TCU makes it out of the year either undefeated or maybe with one loss. That means that their resume consists of wins against OU, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and potential wins over Texas, over Baylor, over Iowa State. Iowa State is the least impressive of those teams, I will admit, but it's still not a bad win by any stretch of the imagination. What do you do with that team then? Let's say they make it out undefeated. They can't miss the college football playoffs, but let's say that there are two remaining undefeated teams at the end of the season. TCU is not one of them. Whoever wins the SEC is, and whoever wins the Big Ten is. Now, where do you align things? How do you go about setting up your college football playoffs? At one loss, TCU is in there for me. I mean, granted, it can't be some crazy, shocking blowout loss to Texas or Baylor or, God forbid, Iowa State, but there's definitely still a conversation to be had, even if they are a one-loss team at the end of the season, strictly because of how impressive their resume is. They've got to replicate. To get to this point, to get to the end of this hypothetical, they have to replicate it. But their offense has given me a reason. Their team has given me a reason. Their overall vibe has given me a reason to think that they might just do it. So, yeah, that is one of those teams that I find super interesting throughout the year. Another team, definitely not for the same reasons, that I find very interesting is Louisville. Their season has been very up and down. You hear Scott Satterfield is about to be fired, or they should extend him. It just keeps going back and forth. It's quite exhausting, to be honest with you. I'm not going to pretend like I just pay the most attention to Louisville fans, but I do know that the fine line that Satterfield has been riding this year has been very interesting. It's kind of funny because I think the team that he's made to this point is the litmus test for the ACC. It's the determiner on if you are truly a good ACC football team, and let me tell you why. They've got wins over UVA, Pitt, and then they've got losses against Syracuse, Florida State, and Boston College. Now, besides Boston College, there's a pretty clear theme here. They've beaten the teams that have looked worse than expected and lost to the ones that ended up jumping up a tier or more. Syracuse jumped up multiple tiers. I think most people expected them to be somewhere near the bottom of the ACC. They are now pretty firmly amongst the top. That's just the teams that they lose to within their conference. Now, granted, they played UCF and a couple of their other out-of-conference opponents. I think they have like SMU coming up or something along those lines. But, the grand scheme of it is that Louisville is kind of the gatekeeper, if you will. They are the ones that protect the next tier of ACC football. And I think we could get some pretty interesting results out of that as well, because you've got North Carolina State, Wake Forest, and Clemson all remaining on the schedule. Now, granted, NC State, not the same team that we thought they were, strictly because Devin Leary is out. That's not what you want to see. That's not best for college football. You don't want to see players get hurt. You don't want to see guys be taken out of these potential moments. But I do think Louisville has the chance to potentially send them down a tier, if you will, and while Wake Forest and Clemson really use that game to establish if they are amongst that level or if they're not. So Louisville, in a sense, is kind of that most middle team in the conference. That team that you can't quite get a read on how good they are, how bad they are, but you know what level of opponent they're supposed to beat. Something else you cannot get a good read on, or at least have not been able to do so throughout the many, many years that he's been in college, is Bo Nix. At Auburn, he was subpar, dare I say. He would have great plays, but he would also have very, very stupid plays, and you would just be very confused when you're watching his play because there was never really any consistency. There was never really any full pattern of what he was going to do or what he wasn't going to do. He just went out there, did his thing. Sometimes it was beautiful, sometimes it was very, very bad football, but I think he might have finally figured it out at Oregon. He might be it. He might have figured it out finally. And all it took was a scenery change, like 4 years in college football, and a drastic overhaul of how he plays. But after weirdly great plays, directly followed by underwhelming ones at Auburn, he now looks like a stud at Eugene. Am I 100% sold? No, absolutely not. But I think that that's probably just the lingering sensation of remembering what he used to be. It's hard mentally. Think about how hard it is to try to forget something that you always knew, or try to change what you've always known something else to be true. If you woke up tomorrow and everybody told you the sky was green, how long would it take you to finally adjust and say, you know what, it's not blue anymore? I think that's my issue right now. People are telling me the sky is green, but I've known it to be blue since I've seen it. But when you look at the numbers, he's been great. 1,800 pass yards, 1 interception since the UGA game, and a completion percentage of 71.5 this year. It's got a lot of public opinion reversal. It's got a lot of public opinion rejuvenation. Oregon as a whole right now has done that. They went from being, quite frankly, they were embarrassed week 1 against Georgia, but now they have slowly worked their way back into relevancy and being a real team to watch out for. And, they just beat UCLA, which is actually not a game we're going to talk about today. I like to leave that one kind of as it is, if you will. That will probably be one that affects how I predict things in the future. It will be one that probably changes my opinion a little bit. I do still think UCLA is the best team in the Pac-12. Here's your little mini rant for UCLA Oregon. But I do at the end of the day think UCLA is probably the best team in the Pac-12 if we're playing pure neutral site games. But Oregon, definitely a team to watch out for. Somebody who has emerged as a team that I did not expect to have to watch out for, South Carolina. They're doing all right for themselves, but I want to make a quick point about it. I don't fully understand how they're doing it. When you look at the numbers and you really break it down, none of what they're doing makes any sense. For example, they are 41st in total offensive ranking, but they are in the 70s for yards on both the ground and through the air. Their pass yards allowed per game ranks nearly 24th. They're good at stopping the pass game, but they're nearly 100th in rush yards allowed per game. They don't force many turnovers, 65 in the nation, or 65th rather in the nation in doing that, but they are 5-2, including wins over Kentucky. Granted, Will Levis was out. You can't fully say that they've beaten the best Kentucky team they can play. They just beat the one that was in front of them, and that's all you can ask for, and they beat A&M this week. They're at 5-2 now. It blows my mind. It truly does, because none of their teams screams successful. None of their team screams quality. But when you truly boil it down, I don't really want to say the word is versatile, because it's really just one specific group of the team stepping up each week and getting it done. But think about it. I mean, that is kind of versatility, being able to, kind of put your weight on a specific player or a specific position group like D-line or O-line or cornerbacks or whatever. That's hard to do. That's hard to find a lot of stability and a lot of trust in being able to do that. Granted, if they strung it all together, they'd be a phenomenal team. But it's just so strange to see that it's almost like this cog's working this week and it's enough to get this win. It's this cog working this week, and while it's close, we're going to get the win here. None of it really feels cohesive or copacetic, and I'm not following fully as to how they are where they are. Somebody I understand exactly how they are where they are is SMU. SMU's season has been very high and very low. You think about everything that they've gone through to this point, which is exactly why I've come here to say that SMU's long-term hopes and long-term schedule and long-term aspirations are still very much intact. And if you are a Mustangs fan, you still feel very good about where your team could be headed. Think about being a player on SMU right now. They lose their head coach. Rhett Lashley has to come in, and learn how to be a head coach, while then your former head coach jumps to a new team, still within the same state. You had to play him, for crying out loud, and he's immediately shooting TCU, his new home, into top 10 status, into potential college football playoff status. It's absurd. Imagine having to witness that. You went from this coach who was very, very good enough to get a Power 5 job at a very solid enough team in a state that is talent rich, where you have to go up against a lot of other universities. He's already making it work with somebody else's players. Now imagine what it's going to be like when he gets his own. There's a lot of bad thoughts that could come with that, being an SMU player. You might feel robbed. You might feel less than because you weren't reaching these same highs and you weren't going undefeated. But despite all of that, Tanner Mordecai, Kamar Wheaton, Jimmy Phillips, the team as a whole have helped keep them at 3-4. They narrowly lost to Cincy this week. They lost by 2 points, a team that is in the AP poll. And when you boil it down even further, you look at the losses to Maryland and TCU. Those games were both decided by one score. It wasn't like these Power 5 schools came into your home or you came into theirs and they just mopped the floor with you. It was a one-score thing. Talia Tagovailoa, before he got hurt, was the talk of the town. He was a special quarterback within the ACC. And then obviously TCU, what they've been doing right now, you can't scoff at. When you look at it, it doesn't make any sense to me to rule them out. And when you look at the long-term forecast for what's coming up for SMU, it makes you feel a lot better. Think about the fact that the AAC is about to lighten up tremendously due to the departure of UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston. Now, think about the fact that your head coach is still almost 500, and it's his first season. And now think about where you're at. Talent-rich state of Texas. A lot of the two-star guys that don't even get looks would still be starters a lot of really, really good places. Even if you're not going to be able to beat out Texas for, a 5-star kid or beat out TCU for a 4-star kid, it doesn't matter because realistically, you're going to get a lot of good talent. You're getting a weaker conference, which maybe that's not as great for your hopes of maybe making the college football playoffs or doing whatever. But you are getting a better draw of things, and you're going to have less of a difficult time winning games. And SMU as a whole, while it's not been the perfect season, I do think they're still set up pretty well. For these next two, I want to stay in Texas, and I want to talk about coaches in Texas because there are two very specific coaches that have come up on the hot seat talk or, they're in panic mode or whatever it is. One of those I do not agree with at all, and that is Steve Sarkisian from Texas. And quite frankly, everybody is getting too in their head about their own hyped up belief on what Texas was going to be. If you land Arch Manning, you're not on the hot seat. If your losses come by a total of 11 points and your opponents were Alabama, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech, you're not on the hot seat. If you lead a team to the most lopsided win in your biggest rivalry game, the team you cannot stand the most, you're not on the hot seat. You getting the point? Sark is in his second year. He's still trying to build what he is, what is going to become. Realistically, you've got another 2 years before you're going to see Arch Manning on the field and as the full-time starter for Texas. If he can't get something built for that and get it prepared for him over these next 2 seasons, fine, I'll concede. I'll let you have it. The Sark should have absolutely been fired to save yourself the headache or whatever, but why pull the plug now? He's shown you that this team could be very, very good. They just haven't pieced it together yet. You can't rush into, he needs to go. We're tired of it, yada, yada. That's not how this should work. It's simple. It's as simple as that. But I did say that there were 2 coaches within the state of Texas that I wanted to talk about that were on the hot seat. And while I don't agree with Sarkisian's, I do absolutely agree with Jimbo Fisher. I believe, personally, that he now has the hottest seat in the SEC, and that, yes, that is including Brian Harsin. You did not miss it. Brian Harsin did not get fired. I just think what Jimbo Fisher has put on the field this year is exponentially worse to look at, whenever you consider the circumstances, than what Auburn has done and what Brian Harsin has put on the field. When the cost of the coach is as large as Jimbo, the expectations were as high as they were, and the results are as average as they are, you are under much more of a microscope than the other head coaches like Brian Harsin, who had their expectations watered down. If you want to throw, I don't know, Mike Leach or somebody in there, part of that, they did not have the same level of expectations as A&M. A&M was a top 10 team in the country, projection-wise, with the AP poll, with where people thought they were going to perform at the start of the year. They were a top 10 team. None of these other coaches in the SEC are doing less with more. Jimbo Fisher has maybe the third most talented roster. I think you would probably argue fourth because you've got Alabama, you've got Georgia, and then maybe LSU. If that's how you want to go about it, because LSU is such a talent-dense team. They just haven't really strung it together yet. But A&M, regardless, was seen as a top 10 team in this country. They have not been that. And when you put it under the microscope and you really look to see, what were the issues here? Where can we pinpoint as to what messed us up? Well, for one, Jimbo failed to accurately identify a starting quarterback. He has failed to get the defense where it needs to be to make the stops when it's most needed, and they've lost games that they have to win. Last week, you could not really afford to lose to South Carolina and keep hold of hopes of having anything more than a very small or very meaningless bowl game. That just wasn't going to be the case. It's hard to envision any other university eating Jimbo's deal. I'll be the first to admit that. If this was a different program that was paying Jimbo Fisher just tons of money, you'd say they're probably going to have to hold on to him strictly because of how much he costs. But guess what? A&M, they got insane amounts of money. Insane amounts of money. It's ridiculous how much money that program has in their pocket. Jimbo Fisher doesn't hardly make a dent in it if they decide they want to let him go. Before we exit this podcast, before I let you go, we are going to go ahead and flash up my predictions. As you can see, 2 for 8. Not great. Not what you want. Not exactly how I thought this week would go, but hey, that's the nature of the beast. I'm talking for all the world to see if they choose to tune in, and I'm going to be right sometimes, I'm going to be wrong sometimes. That's the nature of what I'm doing here. Oklahoma State getting a bounce back win, Penn State taking out their frustrations on Minnesota. Those felt like easy ones to me. Oklahoma State rather was not an easy one, turns out. That was a pretty close game, but they did end up going right. But as you can see, there's a cavalcade, a laundry list, a metric S-ton of things that I got wrong there. So, you know what? That is what it is. And hopefully this next week will be better. Speaking of, you can see how right or wrong I'm going to be, and you can follow along with it, or you can criticize me for them, or do whatever you want with them. But my predictions come out on Thursday, so make sure to come back for that. But for now, that is episode 43, I believe, 43 of the From My Prospective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.